Okay, now we're going to see how we incorporate these different chord qualities into jazz music. And really, almost all jazz music is based on what we call 2-5-1s. And they're kind of hidden in different keys in some pieces. But once you understand that terminology and start to listen for those, you'll see them pop up everywhere in jazz. Here's an example of, in the key of B flat, here's the 2 chord, which would be the C minor 7 chord. Okay, so if you take a look at the chord I just played, we have the C, the root of the chord, E flat, the third of the chord, and B flat, the 7th of the chord. And if you remember what we talked about with chord qualities, if we have C, E flat, and B flat, we have a minor 7 chord, okay? And also if you remember, we talked about where do the chords come from within the scale. The minor 7 chord is the 2 of the major scale. So we're going to assume then that if C is the 2, B flat is the 1. So if we're looking for B flat, a B flat dominant 7 or B flat major 7, okay, the key we're in, the C chord is our 2, and the F dominant 7 would be our 5 to take us back to, we're going to go ahead and use another dominant chord for that 1 chord. So if we put those together, we have the 2, the 5, and the 1. Now you'll notice, as we talked about in earlier videos, our right hand really doesn't have to move very far. For the 1 chord, we have the D and the A flat for the 3rd and the 7th. For the 2 chord, they both move up to E flat and B flat. And for the 5 chord, the E flat actually stays and becomes the 7th of the F chord. And the top note comes down a half step to give us our 3rd. So there's our F chord, F, here's the A, the 3rd, and the 7th. And then once we go back to the B flat, we're going to use, again, the dominant 7 instead of the major 7 for now, just in the chord progression that we're going to play with. So if we use those 3-note voicing examples, and let me start for you a little accompaniment track, and let's see if we can play those together. Okay, so you see, from the B flat to the C is a minor, to the 5, F, is a dominant, and back to 1. And again, you're going to see what we call 2-5-1s hidden all over the place in jazz. They may not always be in the original key you start in. So I'd encourage you, when you see a minor chord followed by a dominant chord, look for or try to determine if that is a 2-5 progression in a different key maybe, especially if it's using accidentals, you might consider that. So experiment with this 2-5-1 idea in the key of B flat and maybe in the other keys as well. I would encourage you to take a look at the key of F and maybe even the key of C to start with, and then venture around the circle of fifths until you've covered all the keys in the 2-5-1 progressions. Hi, in this segment we're going to take a look at tritone substitutions, and they work really well to create some variety in the music that we're playing. So we're going to take a look at the different ways that we can create tritone substitutions to make your music a little more interesting. We're going to start, in this case, in the key of C. So here's the C major 7 chord first. Okay, there we have the C major 7 chord, and we're going to do a simple 2-5-1 progression with the C major 7 chord, the D minor 7 chord, and then to the G dominant 7 chord, and back to the 1 major 7 chord. We're going to continue to use our 3-note shell voicing that we've been looking at so far. So the roots in our left hand of the C chord, the 3rd and the 7th are here. Then we move to the 2 chord, the D, 3rd and 7th here, and then we move up to the 5 chord. The F now becomes our 7, and we move down to the B, which is our 3. That gives us our dominant sound, and then back to C. Again, the B stays for our 7th, and we move the F down to E for our 3rd. Okay, take a listen to this progression and see what you think. Right. Now, we've taken a look at a progression like that in the past, but now we're going to give you an option to make some changes in that. And we call those tritone substitutions. And in this case, instead of playing, here's the C major, the D minor, instead of going to the dominant 5, G7, we're going to come to D flat. And we have D flat, F, and now we're going to call this note C flat instead of B, so that it is the 3rd and the 7th of the D flat chord, or a flat 2 chord. So our right hand's really not going to do anything differently than we did earlier. C major, D minor, and then we were using the F and the B for the G dominant 7. Now we're using it for the flat 2 chord, and then back to 1. So let me make those changes on the recording, and we'll take a listen to what that sounds like. All right, so you can see that just simply by changing to the flat 2 and using the same right hand pattern, the 3rd and the 7th of the dominant chord, but now they switch roles. Now the top note is the 3rd and the bottom note is the bottom note is the 3rd, the top note is the 7th. We get a little bit of a different sound. That makes it interesting. So experiment with that in all the keys. You don't want to use too many tritone substitutions, or people kind of know that they're coming. So use them sparingly, but experiment with those and see what you think. Okay, to this point we've taken a look at the basic parts of a chord, the root, the 3rd, the 5th, and the 7th. And now we want to look at some extensions of those chords, mostly known as the 9th, 11th, and the 13th. So we're going to take a look at a D minor 7 chord first and see how to extend that like this. Okay, so we're going to take our D minor 7 chord that we just played, and basically, hopefully you've noticed by now that all of our chords are just stacked thirds, the interval of third. D to F to A to C, those are all thirds that give us that chord. Now we're going to continue to stack thirds. So a third above C is E. So if we play the 3rd, the 5th, the 7th, and now the E we're going to call the 9th, because if this is the 7th, 7, 8, 9 gives us the E. Now you might say, well, isn't that the 2nd scale degree of the D scale? It is, but when we go an octave above, we usually call that the 9th. So we're going to have 3, 5, 7, and 9. Now you might say, well, that looks like an F major 7 chord. It does, but the bass player is still going to be playing the D, so it really gives us a D minor 9 chord. Okay, and here's the 9. Now, if we move the thirds up once more, the 5th, the 7th, the 9th, and G is now the 11th, then we get an 11 chord for the D. Now again, you might say, well, that looks like an A minor 7 chord or a dominant 7 chord. It does look like that, but it really depends on that bass note. So in this case, we're calling it a D11. And then finally, 7, 9, 11, and 13 looks like what? It looks like a C major 7 chord, but with that D in the bass, we're calling it a D minor 13 chord. So let's take a look at all those together. Here is the D chord, just with a 7. We move our thirds up. Now we have the 9, the D minor 9. Here's the 11, and finally, here's the 13. And we're going to experiment with using these even when the chord progressions don't call for 9s or 11s or 13s. Sometimes we'll use those anyway because it makes the chord progression more interesting, and it also makes it easier to play on the piano from a voicing standpoint where your hands are going. So we'll do some more with that moving forward, but I just wanted to introduce to you what extensions are, and later we'll talk about how we're going to use those. So far we've been taking a look at voicing our chords in a 3-note voice or shell voicing, some people call that. Now we're going to take a look at block chords, which adds a few more notes to each chord and makes them a little richer. So we're going to start with the D minor 7 chord again, and then I'm going to show you how to play those with using block chord style. And basically what we do with the block chords is we play the chord in our right hand, and with our left hand we're going to double the highest note. So in this case it's the 7th of the D or the C, so we're going to add it at the bottom. Just makes the chord a little fuller and a little richer. Now if we move to the inversion and play the D9 chord, now remember that looks like it's an F chord, but if our bass player is playing the D in the bass, then it gives us the 9 chord. Instead of playing the D here, again we're going to double the top note, which in this case is the E. So that's going to give us, again, a richer sound and really doubles what's going on the top. We continue that. When we get to the 11, we're doubling the 11. And then finally, now you can do that in any key and in any inversion that you want. Even when we come back to the root position chord, we're doubling that 7. Okay, so experiment with using the block chords in the various pieces that you're playing, and you won't use them for every note, for every chord change, but you will be able to use them at times to make the sound fuller and richer. All right, we've taken a look at the block chord voicing that many people use, and we're going to now take a look at a variation of that, which is called drop 2 chords. Again, we're going to stay with the D minor 7 chord and experiment with the drop 2 chord voicings. Okay, we've just taken a look at block chord voicing, which would give us this sound, basically the D minor 7 chord with the 7 in the bass, or the highest note doubled in the bass. Now we want to take a look at what we call drop 2 chords, and basically whatever the second note from the top is, we're going to not play it here. We're going to drop it down to the bass and not double the top note. So we're doubling the next to the top note. And you can see on the keyboard, that just gives us a little more open voice. Listen to that sound compared to this sound. Or a little more open. Again, if we move up, there's our 9 chord. Here's our blocked voice option. Now if we use the drop 2, we're going to move the C down. And again, that just gives you a more open sound. Okay? And if we move to the 11th, here's our block chord option. Move the E down. More open. And finally, the 13th sound. So again, that gives you some variety in the options you have as you're playing chords. And you really have to let the music dictate how you want to play those chords and how thick or thin they need to be or how full they need to be. So take a look at that once more. Here's the D. There's the block chord option. So if we drop the second highest note down to the bass, and that gives us just a more open sound. Again, experiment with that in the other keys and in pieces you're working on and see if you can find ways to incorporate drop two chords.